The dust cloud rose behind the carriage like a funeral shroud, and Catherine Hartwell pressed her palm against the window glass, watching the grand columns of her uncle's mansion fade into the shimmering heat of the Arizona Territory afternoon. Her exile had been decided over breakfast, pronounced with the cold efficiency of a judge sentencing a criminal. And by noon, she was already miles from everything she had ever known, bound for a mining town called Salvation Creek, with nothing but 2 trunks of belongings and a heart that felt like shattered porcelain. The year was 1882, and Governor Theodore Hartwell had made his position unmistakably clear. His niece, raised in the finest society Phoenix could offer, educated in San Francisco, groomed to marry into wealth and political advantage, had committed the unforgivable sin of falling in love with a gambling man. Not just any gambling man, but Daniel Prescott, a smooth-talking card sharp with debts in 3 territories, and a reputation that preceded him like the stench of rotting meat. Catherine had been blind to it all, seeing only his handsome face and silver tongue, believing his promises of reform and devotion. It had taken her uncle's private investigators exactly 2 weeks to uncover that Daniel had 2 other women he had made similar promises to, along with outstanding warrants and a string of broken hearts from Santa Fe to Sacramento. When confronted with the evidence, Catherine had done something she would spend the next several days regretting. She had defended him. She had raised her voice to the governor himself, called him controlling and heartless, accused him of caring more about his political image than her happiness. The words had poured out like poison and once spoken could not be taken back. Her uncle's face had turned to granite and his verdict came swift and absolute. She would be sent away from polite society, exiled to the roughest edge of civilization where perhaps hard living would teach her the value of good judgment. She would manage a small property he owned near Salvation Creek, a patch of land with a modest house that he had won in a business deal. She would live there until she learned humility, gratitude, and the wisdom to choose better. The carriage hit a rut and Catherine's head bounced against the wooden frame. The driver, a taciturn man named Horace who had not spoken more than 10 words since they departed, did not slow down. The landscape outside had transformed from the cultivated environs of Phoenix into wild, untamed country. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels against the blazing sky, and the mountains in the distance shimmered purple and gold in the relentless heat. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, and Catherine felt a strange kinship with it. She too had been beautiful in her uncle's world, decorative and admired, but ultimately expected to bend to the will of others. Now she was cast out into something raw and real, and the terror of it mixed with something else she had not expected, a spark of defiance. They reached Salvation Creek as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson that seemed almost violent in their intensity. The town was exactly what Catherine had feared, a collection of weathered buildings clustered along a single main street, with the constant sound of hammering from the mines echoing off the canyon walls. Men covered in dust moved between the saloons and supply stores, and the few women she saw were either painted ladies hanging from second-story windows or worn-down wives carrying water buckets, their faces aged beyond their years. The house her uncle had provided sat on the outskirts of town, a small structure of adobe and wood that looked like it had been forgotten by time itself. The land around it was scrubby and dry, and a small barn leaned at an angle that suggested it might collapse in the next strong wind. Horace helped her unload her trunks without ceremony, accepted the coin she offered him, and departed back toward Phoenix before the dust from his arrival had even settled. Catherine stood alone in front of her new home, still wearing her traveling dress of fine blue cotton, her hair pinned in the elaborate style that had been fashionable at her uncle's dinner parties. She had never felt more out of place in her entire life. The inside of the house was marginally better than the outside. Someone had at least swept recently, and there was basic furniture. A bed frame with a thin mattress, a table with 2 chairs, a wood stove, and some shelves. The windows had shutters but no curtains, and the floor was packed earth in some places, rough planks in others. Catherine set down her handbag and simply stood in the center of the main room, trying not to cry. She had been raised in luxury, with servants to tend to her every need, and now she was expected to survive in this place that felt barely more civilized than a cave. But Catherine Hartwell had more steel in her spine than her uncle had given her credit for. She had made a terrible mistake with Daniel Prescott, let her romantic notions override her common sense, but she was not broken. She was 22 years old, healthy and intelligent, and she would not give her uncle the satisfaction of crawling back to him in defeat. If he wanted her to learn lessons in this forsaken place, then she would learn them, but she would do it on her own terms. She spent the remainder of the evening unpacking her trunks, hanging her dresses on pegs driven into the wall, arranging her few books on the shelves, setting out the silver-framed photograph of her parents who had died when she was 12, leaving her in the care of her uncle. By the time darkness fell complete and absolute, she had made the house marginally more livable. She ate a cold supper from the provisions Horace had unloaded, bread and cheese and dried fruit, and lay down on the bed fully clothed, too exhausted to even remove her boots. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by unfamiliar sounds, coyotes howling in the distance, the wind rattling the shutters, the settling creaks of the old house. Morning arrived with brutal sunshine streaming through the gaps in the shutters. Catherine woke with a stiff neck and the realization that she had absolutely no idea how to proceed. She needed water, food, supplies. She needed to understand what her uncle expected her to do with this property. She needed, quite simply, to figure out how to survive. She changed into a simpler dress, one meant for day wear rather than society functions, and pinned her hair into a more practical bun. Then she walked into Salvation Creek proper, her head held high despite the stares she attracted. A woman of her obvious refinement was a rare sight in a mining town, and she felt the weight of dozens of eyes following her progress down the dusty main street. The general store was called Macready's, and it smelled of tobacco, leather, and coffee. The proprietor, a barrel-chested man with a thick mustache, looked her up and down with unconcealed curiosity. "You must be the governor's niece," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Word travels fast in a small town. I am James Macready. What can I do for you, Miss Hartwell?" Catherine had prepared a list in her mind during the walk. "I need basic supplies: flour, beans, coffee, salt, sugar, candles, firewood if you have it. I need to know where to get water, and I need to understand what I am supposed to do with the property I have been sent to manage." Macready nodded slowly. "Your uncle's land has a well, though I hear it needs some work. As for what you are supposed to do with it, that is a question you will need to answer yourself. The previous owner tried to run a few head of cattle, but the grazing is not good. Some folks grow vegetables if they can keep them watered. Mostly people out here just try to hold on and not get beaten down by the sun and the solitude." He began gathering items from the shelves. "If you do not mind my saying, miss, you do not look much like you belong in a place like Salvation Creek." "I do not belong here," Catherine said quietly, "but I am here nonetheless, and I intend to make the best of it." Macready's expression softened further. "That is a good attitude. You will need it. There are some decent folks in this town, and there are some that are not so decent. You be careful, especially being out there alone. If you need anything, you come to me or my wife. We look after each other out here when we can." Catherine felt unexpected warmth at his kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Macready. I appreciate that more than you know." She left the store with her arms full of supplies and her coin purse significantly lighter. The walk back to her house seemed longer in the building heat, and by the time she arrived, her dress was damp with perspiration and her arms ached from carrying the heavy bags. She had never done this kind of physical labor before, and it was humbling to realize how soft her life had been. Over the next week, Catherine began to establish a routine. She woke with the sun, tended to the basic tasks of survival, making fire, cooking simple meals, sweeping the endless dust that crept in through every crack and crevice. She discovered that the well did indeed need work. The rope was frayed and the bucket had a crack. She walked into town and paid a man to come fix it, watching carefully as he worked so she might understand how things functioned. She started a small garden plot, though she had no real knowledge of planting, and could only hope that something would grow from the seeds she pressed into the reluctant earth. The isolation was the hardest part. In Phoenix, she had been surrounded by people constantly, servants, visitors, her uncle's political associates, friends from her social circle. Here, she could go days without speaking to another soul. The silence was vast and oppressive, and it left too much room for her thoughts to circle back to her mistakes. She thought about Daniel Prescott and felt a confusing mixture of anger, embarrassment, and lingering hurt. She had truly believed he loved her, had been willing to defy her uncle for him, and discovering the depth of his deception had shaken her faith in her own judgment. It was on her 10th day in Salvation Creek that she first saw the cowboy who would change everything. She had walked into town to post a letter to her childhood friend Margaret in San Francisco, a carefully worded missive that explained her situation without revealing too much of her shame, and was leaving the tiny post office when she heard shouting from the direction of the livery stable. Curiosity drew her closer, and she saw a crowd gathered in a rough circle, cheering and calling out bets. In the center of the circle, a horse was rearing and bucking, wild-eyed and dangerous, while a man attempted to calm it. The man was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of desert sand. He wore dusty denim trousers, a faded shirt, a leather vest, and a hat that had seen better days. But what struck Catherine most was the way he moved, with a fluid grace and confidence that spoke of someone completely at home in his body and his environment. He was speaking to the horse in a low, steady voice, his hands held out non-threateningly, his posture relaxed despite the danger of those flailing hooves. "That horse is a killer," someone in the crowd said loudly. "Kicked its last owner near to death, should be put down." "Beckett can handle him," another voice countered. "He has a way with wild things." Catherine watched, transfixed, as the man called Beckett continued his patient approach. The horse, a beautiful bay with a white blaze, snorted and stamped, but its eyes showed more fear than genuine aggression. Beckett kept talking, kept moving slowly closer, until finally his hand touched the horse's neck. The animal shuddered but did not pull away, and gradually, incrementally, it began to calm. The tension went out of its muscles, its ears swiveled forward, and it lowered its head to lip at Beckett's shirt. The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers and groans as money changed hands over the outcome of bets. Beckett seemed oblivious to the attention, entirely focused on the horse. He stroked its neck, ran his hands down its legs, checked its hooves with practiced efficiency. Then he looked up and his eyes swept across the gathered onlookers, and for just a moment, his gaze met Catherine's. She felt the impact of that look like a physical thing. His eyes were a startling pale blue, almost gray, and they held an intelligence and intensity that made her breath catch. Then the moment passed, he looked away, and Catherine felt oddly bereft. "Who is that man?" she asked the woman standing next to her, a matronly type with a basket over her arm. "That is Cole Beckett," the woman replied. "Works as a ranch hand for the Triple R spread outside town, but he is known for his way with horses. Folks bring him the difficult ones, the ones that have been broken wrong or mistreated. He fixes them somehow, lives alone, keeps to himself mostly. Good man, from what I hear, though quiet." Catherine filed the information away and forced herself to turn and walk back toward her house. She had no business being interested in a cowboy, no matter how skilled he was with horses. She was here to learn her lessons and eventually, presumably, earn her way back into her uncle's good graces. Getting entangled with another unsuitable man would be the height of foolishness. But over the following days, she found her thoughts returning to Cole Beckett with frustrating frequency. She told herself it was simply because he had been the most interesting thing she had witnessed in her monotonous new life. But she suspected it was more than that. There had been something in the way he handled that frightened horse, a gentleness combined with strength, a patience that suggested deep reservoirs of character that called to something in her. 2 weeks after her arrival in Salvation Creek, disaster struck. Catherine had been working in her struggling garden, trying to encourage the few pathetic shoots that had emerged from the soil, when she heard a tremendous crack from the direction of the barn. She ran over to find that the structure had finally surrendered to age and weather. One entire wall had collapsed, and the roof was sagging dangerously. If she had any animals, they would have been crushed. As it was, the damage meant she had no shelter for the old mare she had been considering purchasing to make travel to town easier. She stood staring at the wreckage, fighting the urge to sit down in the dust and weep. She had no idea how to repair a barn. She barely had enough money to pay someone else to do it. This was exactly the kind of challenge she was utterly unprepared for, and the unfairness of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She had made one mistake, fallen for one liar, and now she was expected to survive in conditions that would challenge even someone raised to this life. That looks like it was quite a collapse. Catherine spun around to find Cole Beckett sitting astride a rangy chestnut horse, watching her with those unsettling pale eyes. Up close, he was even more striking than she had realized. His face was all angles and planes, weathered by sun and wind, with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it did not smile often. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 4 or 5 years older than she was. "It has been threatening to fall for days," Catherine said, trying to maintain her composure despite the fact that she was covered in dirt and probably looked like a disaster herself. "I suppose I should be grateful it did not happen while I was inside." Beckett swung down from his horse with easy grace and walked over to inspect the damage. He did not ask permission, simply moved around the ruins with the same focused attention he had given the wild horse. Catherine watched him, unsure whether to be annoyed or grateful for the interference. "The foundation is still good in places," he said after a few minutes, "and some of this timber can be salvaged. It would take work, but it could be rebuilt. Do you have tools?" "I have very little," Catherine admitted. "I am not exactly equipped for frontier construction." He glanced at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "You are the governor's niece, the one who was sent here as punishment." Heat flooded Catherine's cheeks. Of course everyone in town knew her story. There were no secrets in a place this small. "Is that what they are saying?" "They are saying a lot of things, most of it speculation and gossip, but the general shape is that you fell in love with the wrong man and your uncle decided to teach you a lesson." His tone was neutral without judgment, but Catherine still felt the shame of it. "That is accurate enough," she said stiffly. "I made a poor choice and now I am paying the consequences." Beckett studied her for a long moment, and Catherine had the uncomfortable feeling that he was seeing past all her carefully maintained composure to the fear and loneliness underneath. Then he said something that surprised her completely. "I could help you rebuild this barn. I have some experience with construction and I have access to tools. It would take a few weeks, working evenings and my day off. I would not charge much, just materials and a bit for my time." Catherine blinked at him. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." "I know enough. I know you are alone out here and struggling. I know this country does not forgive mistakes or weakness, and I know what it is like to be judged for loving poorly." Something dark and painful flickered across his face, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Consider it a welcome to Salvation Creek. God knows this town could use more kindness." Catherine felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. In the 3 weeks since her exile, no one had offered her genuine help without curiosity or judgment attached. "I do not have much money," she said honestly. "My uncle has cut my allowance to almost nothing." "Then you will pay what you can when you can. I am not worried about it." Beckett walked back to his horse and gathered the reins. "I will come by tomorrow evening after I finish at the ranch. We can make a plan and start clearing the debris." "Mr. Beckett," Catherine called as he prepared to mount. He paused and looked back at her. "Thank you, truly." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was pure Old West courtesy. "It is just Cole, and you are welcome, Miss Hartwell." "Catherine," she said impulsively. "If we are going to be working together, you should call me Catherine." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Catherine, then, I will see you tomorrow." He rode off, and Catherine stood watching until he disappeared into the heat shimmer of the afternoon. Her heart was beating faster than it should have been, and she felt something she had not experienced in weeks, a small, fragile seed of hope. True to his word, Cole appeared the next evening just as the worst heat of the day was beginning to fade. He brought tools, work gloves, and a canteen of water. He also brought a calm, steady presence that Catherine found deeply reassuring. They worked side by side, pulling apart the collapsed sections of the barn, sorting timber into piles of salvageable and beyond repair. Cole explained what he was doing as he worked, teaching her the basics of construction without making her feel ignorant. He had a way of speaking that was economical but clear, his voice a low rumble that she found herself straining to hear. As they worked, they talked, tentatively at first, then with growing ease. Cole had been born in Texas, he told her, but had drifted west after his family's ranch failed during the drought of 1878. He had worked a dozen different jobs: trail drives, mining, ranch hand, even a brief stint as a deputy in a town so small it did not have a name on any map. He was 26 years old, and he had been in the Arizona Territory for 2 years, saving money with the vague notion of eventually buying land of his own. "What about family?" Catherine asked, handing him a crowbar so he could pry loose a stubborn beam. "Parents are gone. Father died in the war before I was born, mother from fever when I was 17. Had a younger sister, but she married a shopkeeper in Dallas. We write occasionally, but we are not close." He grunted with effort as the beam came free. "What about you? Besides the governor uncle, I mean." "My parents died when I was young, a carriage accident. My uncle took me in, gave me every advantage, and I repaid him by being spectacularly foolish." Catherine wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of dirt behind. "I thought I was in love. I thought Daniel, that was his name, I thought he was different from the stiff, boring men my uncle kept introducing me to. He was exciting, romantic, full of grand plans and passionate declarations. I believed every word." "What happened?" Cole's voice was gentle, inviting confidence. "My uncle had him investigated. Turned out he was a con man with multiple women on the line, each of us thinking we were special. When I was confronted with the evidence, I defended him. Loudly, said terrible things to my uncle. By the time I realized my mistake, the damage was done. Hence exile to Salvation Creek," she laughed bitterly. "My uncle said I needed to learn the difference between pretty words and real worth. I suppose he had a point." Cole stopped working and looked at her directly. "Your love was not poor, Catherine. It was real and sincere. The fact that it was given to someone who did not deserve it does not diminish its value. It just means you are capable of deep feeling, and that is not something to be ashamed of." The words struck Catherine with unexpected force. In all the lectures and recriminations from her uncle, no one had acknowledged that her emotions had been genuine, that she had been hurt rather than simply stupid. Tears pricked at her eyes and she turned away quickly, not wanting Cole to see, but he saw anyway. He set down his tools and walked over to her, and after a moment's hesitation, placed a calloused hand gently on her shoulder. "This territory is full of people running from mistakes or pain. You are not unique in that, but you are here working hard trying to build something from nothing. That takes courage. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Catherine drew a shaky breath and nodded, not trusting her voice. Cole's hand lingered for another moment, warm and solid, then withdrew. They went back to work, but something had shifted between them. A wall had come down, and the beginnings of real friendship began to take root. Over the following weeks, Cole became a fixture at Catherine's property. He came every evening after his ranch work was done and all day on Sundays, his one day off. Slowly, methodically, the barn began to rise again from its ruins. He taught Catherine how to hammer nails straight, how to measure and cut timber, how to judge whether a structure was sound. Her hands developed blisters that turned to calluses, and her arms grew stronger from the unaccustomed labor. She stopped wearing her fine dresses and instead adopted simple cotton skirts and blouses that could withstand dirt and sweat. They fell into an easy rhythm of working and talking. Catherine told him about her life in Phoenix, the endless social obligations and the feeling of being decorative rather than useful. Cole spoke of his wandering years, the beauty and brutality of the frontier, the satisfaction of working with his hands. He told her about the woman he had loved in Texas, a rancher's daughter named Sarah who had promised to wait for him while he made his fortune, then married someone else within 6 months of his departure. "That is why I said I understood loving poorly," he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch of Catherine's house, drinking cool water from the well and watching the sunset paint the sky. "I loved her completely, would have done anything for her, but she was practical in ways I was not. She wanted security, not dreams. When I could not provide that fast enough, she moved on. I was angry for a long time, but eventually I realized we wanted different things from life. Her love was conditional on circumstances, and mine was not. Neither is wrong exactly, but they were not compatible." "Do you still think about her?" Catherine asked quietly. "Sometimes, but more as a lesson than a loss. She taught me that love needs to be matched on both sides, not just in feeling but in commitment and values. Pretty words are easy. Showing up when things are hard, that is what matters." Catherine thought about that as she watched the last light fade from the sky. Cole had been showing up for weeks now, asking nothing in return, giving his time and skill freely. It was so different from Daniel's grand gestures and empty promises. There was something deeply attractive about Cole's quiet reliability, his competence, his willingness to back his words with action. She was falling in love with him. The realization came suddenly, but with absolute certainty. It was different from what she had felt for Daniel, less dramatic, but deeper and more real. She loved the way Cole treated the frightened horses he worked with, patient and kind. She loved his dry sense of humor that emerged unexpectedly. She loved the way he looked at her, really looked, seeing not the governor's disgraced niece but Catherine herself. And she loved working beside him, the companionable silence, the shared satisfaction of building something together. The problem was that she had no idea how he felt about her. He was unfailingly courteous, helpful, friendly even. But he maintained a careful distance, never touching her beyond the occasional steadying hand on her elbow or shoulder. He never said anything that could be construed as romantic interest, and why would he? She was a woman who had already proven her judgment in men was catastrophically flawed. He probably saw her as a charity case, someone who needed help, not as a potential romantic partner. By the time the barn was finished, Catherine was thoroughly tangled in her own emotions. The structure stood solid and true, a testament to Cole's skill and their combined labor. They had celebrated its completion with a simple meal Catherine cooked, beans and cornbread. Nothing fancy but honest food, and Cole had accepted her payment of the small amount she could afford without making her feel inadequate. "I suppose you will be glad to have your evenings back," Catherine said as they stood looking at the completed barn in the fading light. "You have spent so much time here over the past month." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I have not minded. It has been good to have a project, and the company has been welcome." "Company," Catherine repeated, trying to keep the disappointment out of her voice. Yes, I suppose we have kept each other company, Catherine. He turned to face her fully, and there was something intense in his expression that made her breath catch. I need to say something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond. Her heart began to pound. All right. I know you came here because of a mistake with a man who did not deserve you. I know you are probably not looking for any kind of romantic entanglement, and I respect that. But I need you to know that these past weeks, getting to know you, working alongside you, watching you tackle this hard life with courage and grace, it has meant more to me than I can properly express. You are intelligent and strong and good-hearted, and I find myself thinking about you constantly. Catherine's breath had stopped entirely. She stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. Cole continued, his voice steady but his hands clenched at his sides. I am just a cowboy. I do not have money or position or prospects beyond what I can earn with my labor. I am nobody important, and I have nothing to offer you that would impress men like your uncle, but what I do have is real. My feelings for you are real. My respect and admiration are real. And if you were willing, if you could see past my lack of status to the man underneath, I would count myself the luckiest person in this whole territory. Tears were streaming down Catherine's face, but for the first time in months they were happy tears. Cole, you are wrong about one thing. You are not nobody. You are the best man I have ever known. You are kind and patient and skilled and honorable. You show up. You do what you say you will do. You see me, the real me, not some decorative object or political pawn, and I am in love with you, desperately, completely in love with you. The expression on Cole's face transformed. Wonder and joy and disbelief all chased across his features. Catherine, are you certain? I do not want you to feel obligated because I helped with the barn or because you are lonely out here. I am certain, she said fiercely. I have never been more certain of anything. My uncle sent me here to learn the difference between poor love and real love, and I have learned it. Real love is not flashy or dramatic. It is showing up every evening to build a barn. It is patient teaching and steady presence. It is seeing someone at their worst and still treating them with kindness. Cole Beckett, your love is rich enough for me. It is more than rich enough. It is everything. Cole closed the distance between them in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms. For a moment, they just held each other, and Catherine felt something settle deep in her soul. This was right. This was real. Then Cole tilted her face up and kissed her, and it was nothing like the practiced kisses Daniel had given her. This was honest and sweet and full of genuine emotion, and Catherine melted into it, her hands fisting in his shirt, her whole being singing with happiness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. I will court you properly, he said. I will do right by you. And when enough time has passed that no one can say you are making another hasty decision, I will ask you to marry me, if that is something you might want. It is something I definitely want, Catherine whispered. But Cole, you should know that if you ask me now, I would say yes. I do not need time to be sure, I already am. Then I am asking, Catherine Hartwell, will you marry me? Yes, yes, absolutely yes. They kissed again, longer and deeper, and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky above them, bright and clear in the vast Arizona night. In the distance, a coyote howled, and from the town came the faint sound of a piano playing in one of the saloons. But in their own small corner of the territory, Catherine and Cole held each other and marveled at the strange paths that had brought them together. Of course, getting married was not as simple as they might have hoped. When news of their engagement spread through Salvation Creek, which it did within approximately 24 hours, reactions were mixed. Many people were happy for them, particularly those like James McCready and his wife who had taken a liking to Catherine. But others were scandalized. The governor's niece marrying a common cowboy. It was a step down from her previous status, confirmation that her exile had reduced her to a point where she would accept anyone. The gossip stung, but Catherine held her head high. She had learned something valuable in her time at Salvation Creek. The opinions of people who did not know her, who judged based on appearance rather than substance, simply did not matter. Let them gossip. She knew the truth, and so did Cole, and that was enough. The real problem was her uncle. Catherine wrote him a letter explaining her engagement, trying to strike a tone that was respectful but firm. She explained that she had learned the lessons he wanted her to learn, that she understood now the difference between charm and character. She told him about Cole's integrity and kindness, and she made it clear that she intended to marry him with or without the governor's blessing. The response came 3 weeks later, and it was exactly as cold and disapproving as Catherine had feared. Governor Hartwell wrote that she was making another catastrophic error in judgment, that she was throwing away her chances at a respectable life for a man with no future. He reminded her that as his ward, she was technically under his authority until she turned 25. He could not legally prevent the marriage, but he could and would cut her off entirely. She would receive no more money, no support of any kind. If she insisted on this foolish course, she would be truly alone. Catherine read the letter twice, feeling the cold weight of her uncle's rejection settle in her chest. Then she folded it carefully and showed it to Cole that evening. He read it in silence, his jaw tightening. "He thinks I am not good enough for you," he said flatly. "He does not know you." If he did, he would think differently. Would he? Cole looked at her with painful honesty. "Catherine, he is not entirely wrong. I cannot give you the life you had in Phoenix. I cannot give you fine dresses and servants and social position. Life with me will be hard work and uncertainty." "Are you truly prepared for that?" "I am not the same person I was in Phoenix," Catherine said firmly. "That life felt like a beautiful cage. Everything was about appearances and advantage, and I felt like a chess piece being moved around a board. Here with you, I feel real. I feel like I matter for who I am, not who I am related to. I would rather have a hard, honest life with you than an easy, hollow one anywhere else." Cole pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I will work hard to give you everything I can, I promise you that. I know you will. And we will build it together, just like we built the barn." They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Salvation Creek. Catherine wore a dress of cream-colored cotton that she had sewn herself, and she carried wildflowers that Cole had picked that morning from the desert. The preacher was a circuit rider who happened to be passing through, and the witnesses were the Macredis and a handful of other townspeople who had become friends. There was no grand reception, no elaborate feast. They shared cake that Mrs. Macready had baked and drank lemonade, and Catherine had never been happier in her entire life. Their wedding night was spent in Catherine's little house, now their house, and it was sweet and tender and everything Catherine had dreamed intimacy could be. Cole was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and Catherine gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. They fell asleep tangled together, and when Catherine woke in the early morning to find Cole still beside her, his arm thrown protectively across her waist, she felt a peace and contentment that she had never known was possible. Life as Cole Beckett's wife was exactly as challenging as he had warned, but Catherine discovered resources within herself she had not known existed. She learned to cook properly, moving beyond the basic survival meals to food that was actually good. She learned to manage their small household, to mend clothes, to preserve vegetables from her gradually more successful garden. Cole taught her to ride, first on an old gentle mare he bought from the ranch where he worked, and eventually on a sprightlier horse that required real skill to handle. Money was perpetually tight. Cole's wages from the ranch were modest, and Catherine's income from sewing work and selling vegetables was unpredictable. But they managed. They learned to make do with less, to be creative, to find richness in things that did not cost money. Evening walks in the desert watching the sunset. Long conversations on their porch after dinner. The simple pleasure of working side by side and knowing they were building a life together. 6 months into their marriage, Cole came home with news. The owner of the Triple R Ranch was retiring and selling off parcels of his land. There was a section, not large but decent grazing, that could be had for a price that was almost within reach if they saved aggressively, and Cole took on extra work. It was a chance to start their own operation, to stop working for someone else and begin building real equity. It would be hard, Cole warned. I would be working sunrise to sunset and beyond. You would be alone much of the time. And it would take everything we have financially with no guarantee of success. Catherine did not hesitate. We take the risk, we work hard, and we build something that is ours. So they did. Cole took every extra job he could find, breaking horses, repairing fences, hauling freight. Catherine expanded her sewing business and began taking in laundry from some of the mine supervisors and their families. They saved every penny, lived on beans and cornbread, wore their clothes until they were patched beyond recognition. It was exhausting and often discouraging, but they had each other, and that made it bearable. One evening during this period, Catherine received an unexpected visitor. She was hanging laundry when a fine carriage pulled up, looking absurdly out of place in the dusty yard. A woman stepped out, elegantly dressed, and Catherine recognized her with a shock. It was Amanda Prescott, one of her friends from Phoenix Society. "Catherine, is that really you?" Amanda stared at her in obvious disbelief. Catherine was wearing a faded work dress. Her hands were red and rough from washing, and her face was deeply tanned from the sun. She looked nothing like the refined young woman who had once attended balls and teas. "Hello, Amanda." Catherine set down the laundry basket, suddenly aware of how dramatically her circumstances had changed. "This is a surprise. What brings you to Salvation Creek?" "I am traveling with my husband to California and we are passing through. I heard you were here and I had to see for myself." Amanda's gaze swept the humble property, the small house, the barn that Catherine and Cole had built. "Catherine, is it true? Did you really marry a cowboy, a man with no family or position?" "His name is Cole Beckett, and yes, I married him. He is the best man I have ever known." Amanda looked genuinely distressed. "But Catherine, you had everything. You could have married well, had a beautiful life, and now you are here doing laundry like a common servant. How can you stand it?" A year ago, Catherine might have felt shame at such questions. Now she just felt pity for Amanda, who clearly could not conceive of value beyond material comfort. "I am standing it just fine, better than fine, actually. I am happy, Amanda, truly happy." "Are you?" The question seemed to catch Amanda off guard. "I suppose so. My husband is wealthy and respectable. We have a fine house and social standing." "But are you happy?" Catherine pressed. "Does he see you, value you? Do you feel like your life has meaning and purpose?" Amanda's expression crumpled slightly. "It is not about happiness, Catherine. It is about security and position and doing what is expected." "It can be about happiness," Catherine said gently. "I know because I have it. My husband loves me for who I am, not for my connections or my uncle's position. We are building something together that belongs to us. We work hard, but we work side by side. And every evening when he comes home, I know that he has chosen me, not out of duty or advantage, but because he genuinely wants to be with me. That is worth more than all the fine dresses and social events in the world." Amanda looked at her for a long moment, something like envy flickering in her eyes. "You have changed," she said finally. "You used to care so much about what people thought." "I still care about some people's opinions, my husband's opinion, for instance. The opinions of our friends here who have shown us kindness, but the opinions of people who judge based on surface appearances. Those do not matter to me anymore. It is incredibly freeing." They talked for a few more minutes, but the conversation remained awkward, two people who no longer had much in common. After Amanda left, Catherine found herself feeling grateful rather than regretful. She had glimpsed what her life might have been: comfortable but constrained, respectable but unfulfilling, and she knew without question that she had chosen better. When Cole came home that evening, dusty and exhausted from a long day working with a particularly difficult horse, Catherine threw her arms around him and held him tight. "What was that for?" he asked, surprised but clearly pleased. "For being you, for loving me, for building this life with me." She pulled back to look at him. "An old friend from Phoenix visited today, and it made me realize all over again how lucky I am. I would not trade what we have for anything." Cole's expression softened. He cupped her face in his rough hands and kissed her forehead. "The luck is all mine, Catherine. You took a chance on a cowboy with nothing but good intentions, and you have made me happier than I ever imagined being. I love you more than I can say." "I love you too. Now come inside and let me feed you before you fall over from exhaustion." They worked toward their land purchase for 2 full years, and it was a study in delayed gratification and stubborn persistence. There were setbacks: a hard winter that required extra spending on fuel, a broken leg for Cole after a horse spooked and threw him that meant lost wages while he recovered, a stretch where Catherine's sewing income dried up because several clients moved away. But they adapted, found new ways forward, supported each other through the frustrations. Catherine discovered that she was far more resilient than she had ever known. The delicate society girl who had arrived in Salvation Creek no longer existed. In her place was a woman with calloused hands and sun-weathered skin who could birth a calf, mend harness, shoot a rifle to scare off coyotes, and haggle over prices at the general store. She had found competence and capability she had never been allowed to develop in her uncle's house, and it felt powerful. She also discovered she was pregnant. The realization came one morning when she was hanging laundry, and the smell of coffee suddenly made her violently ill. Mrs. Macready, noticing Catherine's green complexion in town later that day, asked a few pointed questions and then smiled knowingly. "I would say you are about 2 months along, dear. Congratulations." Catherine felt a surge of emotions: excitement, terror, joy, worry. A baby. She and Cole were going to have a child. They could barely afford to support themselves, and now they would have another mouth to feed. But underneath the practical concerns was a fierce, protective love for the tiny life growing inside her. When she told Cole that evening, he went absolutely still for a moment, processing the news. Then a smile spread across his face, so bright and genuine that it transformed his usually serious features. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Catherine asked, needing to hear him say it. Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, yes. Worried about providing, absolutely. But Catherine, we are going to be parents. We are going to have a family. How could I be anything but overjoyed? He pulled her into his arms, careful and gentle as if she were suddenly made of glass. Catherine laughed at his exaggerated caution. "I am not fragile, Cole. The baby is the size of a bean right now. Still, I am going to take care of you, both of you, I promise." The pregnancy added new urgency to their saving. They needed land not just for themselves now, but for their child's future. Cole worked even longer hours, and Catherine pushed herself hard despite increasing fatigue. Mrs. Macready scolded her regularly for overdoing it, but Catherine could not rest easy knowing how much still needed to be accomplished. Finally, after 2 years and 3 months of relentless saving and sacrifice, they had enough. Barely enough, with no cushion for emergencies, but enough. Cole met with the ranch owner, negotiated the final terms, and signed the papers that made them landowners. It was 160 acres of scrubby grazing land with a small stream, and to Catherine and Cole it might as well have been a kingdom. They walked the property that evening, Cole pointing out where they would build a proper house, where the best grazing was, where they could expand the garden. Catherine, 5 months pregnant now and showing, rested her hand on her belly and imagined their child growing up here with space to run and the freedom to become whoever they wanted to be. "What should we call it?" she asked. "The ranch needs a name." Cole thought for a moment, then said, "What about Second Chances Ranch? Because that is what this place represents for both of us. A second chance to get love right, to build something real." Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes. "That is perfect." They started building their house immediately, working side by side just as they had with the barn. This time they were building something permanent, something that would last generations if they built it right. Cole laid the foundation with meticulous care, and Catherine helped however she could, though he increasingly insisted she rest more as her pregnancy advanced. The house rose slowly from the desert floor, adobe and timber, simple but solid. They could only afford 2 rooms to start, a main living area and a bedroom, but there was space to add on as resources allowed. Cole built a covered porch where they could sit in the evenings, and he carved a rocking chair for Catherine, smoothing the wood until it was soft as silk. She upholstered the seat with fabric she had carefully saved, and she spent many evenings rocking gently, her hands on her growing belly, watching Cole work on the house as the sun set. They moved into the new house when Catherine was 7 months pregnant, though it was not entirely finished. But it was theirs, built by their own hands on their own land, and that made it more beautiful than any mansion. They hung the photograph of Catherine's parents in a place of honor, and Cole built shelves for her books. It was home in a way nowhere else had ever been. The baby came on a hot August night in 1885, attended by Mrs. Macready, who had considerable experience as a midwife. Labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Catherine genuinely thought she might not survive it. But Cole was there the whole time, holding her hand, supporting her, his presence a steady anchor. And when their son finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Catherine looked into his tiny face and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. They named him Samuel, after Cole's father who had died before Cole was born. He was a healthy baby with a shock of dark hair and his father's pale blue eyes. Cole held him with such careful reverence, his rough cowboy hands impossibly gentle, and Catherine watched her husband become a father and felt like her life was complete. The first year of Samuel's life was a blur of sleepless nights and constant work. Catherine learned to nurse while sewing, to cook with a baby strapped to her back, to function on fragments of sleep. Cole worked the ranch and took on additional jobs to keep money coming in. It was relentlessly hard, but they were building something. Their small herd of cattle grew. The garden flourished. The house got a 3rd room, a nursery for Samuel. On Samuel's first birthday, they had a small celebration with the Macreadys and a few other friends from town. It was simple, cake and lemonade, a few small gifts, but it felt like a triumph. They had made it through the hardest year. Their son was thriving. The ranch was beginning to turn a small profit. Against all odds, they were succeeding. That night, after Samuel was asleep and their guests had departed, Catherine and Cole sat on their porch watching the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked quietly. "The hard work, the struggle, the lack of comforts." Cole reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Not even for a moment. This life with you and Samuel, it is everything I ever wanted and more than I ever expected to have." "Do you regret it, giving up your uncle's world for this?" "My uncle's world was never really mine," Catherine said. "It was a place I existed but did not belong. This is where I belong. With you building this life together, I have never been happier or more fulfilled." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the night sky. In the distance, a coyote howled, and from inside the house came the small sounds of their son shifting in sleep. The desert stretched around them, vast and beautiful and unforgiving. But they had learned to thrive in it, to find abundance in austerity, to create richness from simple things. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. The ranch grew steadily. Cole's reputation as a horseman spread, and he began to command premium prices for training. Catherine's sewing evolved into custom work that wealthy mine owners and their wives sought out. They added onto the house, another bedroom, a proper kitchen, eventually a parlor. They bought more cattle, fenced more grazing land, planted an orchard that would take years to mature but represented hope for the future. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around the ranch. Cole taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, and by age 5, Samuel could help with basic chores. Catherine educated him at home, using her own considerable learning to ensure he would have opportunities beyond ranching if he chose. But she also made sure he understood the value of physical work, the satisfaction of building things with his own hands. When Samuel was 3, Catherine became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, her body knowing what to do, and in the spring of 1889 they welcomed a daughter. They named her Grace, because she felt like a gift of grace, an abundance they had not dared to expect. She was a serene baby with Catherine's dark hair and a temperament that seemed inclined toward contentment. Samuel adored his little sister, treating her with careful protectiveness that made both parents smile. Life settled into a rhythm. Hard work, certainly, but punctuated by moments of deep joy. Sunday dinners after church where the 4 of them would sit around the table and share the week's stories. Evening rides across the property, Samuel on his pony and Grace cradled in front of Cole on his saddle. Long winter nights with the family gathered around the fireplace, Cole reading aloud from books while Catherine mended and the children played on the floor. When Samuel was 7 and Grace was 4, Catherine received another letter from her uncle. She almost did not open it, assuming it would be more recriminations, but curiosity got the better of her. The letter was surprising in its tone. Governor Hartwell was dying. Cancer, the doctors said, and he did not have much time. He wanted to see Catherine to make amends before the end. Catherine showed the letter to Cole, her emotions tangled. "I do not know what to do," she admitted. "Part of me is still angry at him for sending me away, for judging you without knowing you, but he is dying and he is family." "What does your heart tell you?" Cole asked gently. "That I should go, that I should let him say whatever he needs to say, and I should say goodbye properly. But I do not want to leave you and the children for the time it would take to travel to Phoenix." "Then we will all go," Cole said decisively. "It will be an adventure for Samuel and Grace, and you should not face this alone." So they made the journey to Phoenix as a family, traveling by stage and rail, the children wide-eyed at everything they saw. Phoenix had grown considerably since Catherine had left, more civilized and built up. The governor's mansion looked exactly as she remembered, imposing and elegant. The butler who answered the door did not recognize Catherine at first. She was no longer the refined young woman in fashionable clothes. She wore a simple but clean traveling dress she had made herself, and her face showed the weathering of years in the sun. Her hands were work-roughened, and she carried Grace on her hip with the easy competence of a woman used to managing multiple tasks. But when she identified herself, the butler's eyes widened and he ushered them in quickly. Governor Hartwell was in bed, clearly in the final stages of his illness. He had always been a large, imposing man, but disease had reduced him to a shadow. When Catherine entered his room, leaving Cole and the children in the parlor, he turned his head and something like relief crossed his face. "Catherine, you came." "Hello, Uncle." She approached the bed, her emotions still complicated but her anger fading in the face of his obvious suffering. "I was not sure you would, after everything." His voice was weak, nothing like the authoritative tone she remembered. "I was very hard on you." "Yes, you were." "I thought I was teaching you a lesson. I thought hardship would make you grateful for the life I had provided, but I was wrong." He gestured weakly for her to sit in the chair beside the bed. "My investigators have kept me informed over the years. You married the cowboy. You built a ranch. You have children, and from what I understand, you are happy, genuinely happy." "I am," Catherine said simply. "Happier than I ever was here. I judged that man without meeting him. I assumed he was another fortune hunter, another Daniel Prescott. Will you let me meet him? And your children?" "I would like to see what you have built." Catherine felt something loosen in her chest. "Of course." She brought Cole and the children in and watched as her uncle's tired eyes took in her family. Samuel stood tall and respectful in his simple but clean clothes, his young face showing curiosity but no fear. Grace hid slightly behind her father's leg, peeking out shyly. And Cole stood calm and dignified, his hat in his hands, meeting the governor's gaze steadily. "Mr. Beckett," her uncle said, "I owe you an apology. I judged you without knowing you, assumed you were not worthy of my niece. I was wrong. I can see in her face, in your children, that you have given her something I never could, genuine happiness and partnership." "With respect, sir, Catherine gave those things to herself," Cole said quietly. "She had the courage to choose authenticity over comfort, to build a life based on real values. I am just fortunate enough to be building it alongside her." Governor Hartwell smiled faintly. "She chose well. Far better than I ever gave her credit for." He looked at Catherine. "I am sorry, my dear, for sending you away, for cutting you off, for not trusting your judgment. You have proven yourself far wiser than I was." Catherine felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." They spent several hours at the mansion. Samuel and Grace gradually lost their shyness, and Samuel told his great-uncle about the ranch, about learning to ride and rope, about his mother teaching him to read from the same books she had studied as a girl. The governor listened with genuine interest, and when it was time for them to leave, he asked Catherine to stay for one more private conversation. "I am leaving you my estate," he said without preamble once they were alone again. "All of it. The house, the investments, everything. I have no other heirs, and it should have been yours anyway." Catherine was stunned. "Uncle, I do not need your money. We have built a good life." "I know you do not need it. That is precisely why I want you to have it. You will use it wisely, not waste it on frivolous things. Maybe expand your ranch, secure your children's futures, or give it all away if you choose, but it should be yours." He looked at her intently. "You were never poor in love, Catherine. Your capacity to love was always rich and deep. You just needed to find someone worthy of it, and you did." "Your love is rich enough for me." Catherine repeated the words Cole had once said. "That is what my husband told me when he asked me to marry him. He saw value in something that you taught me to think was worthless. He is a wise man. Take care of him, and let him take care of you. That is what love should be, mutual care and respect and partnership." Governor Hartwell died 2 days later, peacefully in his sleep. Catherine grieved not for the stern uncle who had exiled her, but for the flawed man who had finally, at the end, understood what mattered. She attended his funeral, accepting condolences from Phoenix society with grace, introducing her husband and children without apology or shame. Let them see what real wealth looked like: a partner who respected her, children who were loved and secure, a life built on honest work and genuine affection. The inheritance was substantial, far more than Catherine had imagined. After careful thought and long discussions with Cole, they decided how to use it. They expanded Second Chance's ranch significantly, buying adjoining land and upgrading their stock. They set aside money for Samuel and Grace's education, whatever path they chose to pursue. They donated a significant sum to build a proper school in Salvation Creek so that other children would have opportunities for learning. And they kept enough in reserve to weather hard times to ensure they would never have to struggle as they had in the early years. But the money did not change the fundamental nature of their lives. They still worked the ranch themselves, still valued the satisfaction of physical labor. Cole still trained horses with infinite patience, and Catherine still sewed and tended her garden. They still sat on their porch in the evenings watching the sunset, still found their deepest happiness in each other's company and their children's laughter. Samuel grew into a capable young man who loved the ranch and decided to make it his life's work. He went off to study animal husbandry at a university in California, then came home to apply what he had learned to improving their operation. At 22, he married a practical, kind woman named Elizabeth who shared his love of the land, and they began building their own house on the ranch property. Grace became a teacher, using her inheritance to fund her education and then returning to Salvation Creek to run the school her parents had funded. She married at 24 to a young engineer named Thomas who came west to work on irrigation projects. They built a house in town, and Grace divided her time between teaching and helping her mother run the charitable foundation they had established to help struggling families in the territory. Catherine and Cole aged gracefully into their 50s, then their 60s, still partners in every sense. Their hair went gray, their bodies bore the marks of hard work, but their love remained constant and true. They watched their children build good lives, welcomed grandchildren, saw the ranch they had started with nothing become a prosperous, respected operation. On their 30th wedding anniversary, they took a day away from work to ride out to the spot where Cole had first told Catherine he loved her, where the barn had once stood that they had rebuilt together. The barn was long since replaced by larger, more modern structures, but the location remained significant. 30 years, Catherine said, leaning against Cole's solid warmth. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a whole lifetime. It has been a good lifetime, Cole said, his arm around her shoulders. The best I could have imagined. Do you remember what you said to me? When you asked me to marry you? I remember every word. I told you I was just a cowboy with nothing to offer but honest feelings. And you told me that my love was rich enough for you. It was more than rich enough. It was everything. Catherine turned to face him, this man who had shown her what real love looked like. His face was lined now, weathered by decades of sun and wind, but his pale blue eyes still held the same intensity, the same steadiness that had drawn her to him. You gave me a life I did not even know was possible. You saw me when I was at my lowest, and you treated me with kindness and respect. You showed up day after day, and you proved that love is not about grand gestures, but about steady presence and genuine care. I love you more now than I did the day we married, and that is saying something because I loved you desperately even then. Cole cupped her face in his work-roughened hands, the same gesture he had made countless times over their years together. Catherine Beckett, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Building this life with you, raising our children, growing old together, every moment has been a gift. If I had the chance to do it all again, I would not change a single thing. They kissed as the sun set over the Arizona desert. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful from nothing, who had proven that the richest love comes not from wealth or status but from mutual respect, genuine partnership, and the courage to choose authenticity over appearance. As darkness fell, they rode home together, side by side as always, to the ranch where their children and grandchildren waited, to the life they had created through hard work and unwavering devotion. The desert night was clear and vast above them, filled with stars, and Catherine thought about the frightened, exiled young woman she had once been, and the strong, fulfilled woman she had become. Her uncle had sent her away to teach her a lesson, but the lesson she had learned was not the one he intended. She had learned that true wealth lies not in money or position, but in love freely given and faithfully kept. She had learned that sometimes exile is not punishment but liberation. And she had learned that the poorest choice she ever made, defending an unworthy man and earning her banishment, had led her to the richest blessing of her life. Cole Beckett, the cowboy who had seen past her mistakes to the woman underneath, who had offered his love without conditions or reservations, and who had proven every single day that some loves are rich enough to last forever. Their story became something of a legend in Salvation Creek and the surrounding territory. People spoke of the governor's niece who had been exiled for loving poorly and found her redemption in the arms of a cowboy with nothing but integrity and devotion to offer. Young couples starting out would visit Second Chance's ranch to seek advice from the Becketts, and Catherine and Cole would share what they had learned. That real love requires work, patience, and commitment. That partnership means facing challenges together rather than keeping score. That the best foundation for a marriage is mutual respect and shared values rather than passion or convenience. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management, and eventually under his children's as well. Grace's school educated generations of children who might otherwise have had no opportunities. The charitable foundation helped dozens of families get their start, offering the kind of support that Catherine and Cole had once desperately needed. The Beckett name became synonymous with integrity and generosity in that part of Arizona. Cole lived to the age of 78, still working the ranch he loved until the very end. He died peacefully one autumn evening, sitting on the porch with Catherine beside him, watching the sunset paint the desert sky. His last words were for her. It was all worth it. Every moment with you was worth everything. Catherine grieved deeply but without regrets. They had been given 36 years together, years filled with love and laughter, hard work and profound satisfaction. She had been blessed beyond measure, and she knew it. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories of the early days, of building the barn and the house, of falling in love with a cowboy who saw her true worth. When she died at 83, she was buried beside Cole on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so vast and blue it seemed to go on forever. Their tombstone was simple. Cole and Catherine Beckett, partners in life, in love, in building something beautiful. Their love was rich enough. And indeed it had been. Rich enough to transform two damaged people into whole ones. Rich enough to build a legacy that lasted generations. Rich enough to prove that the truest wealth comes not from what you possess, but from who you love and how you love them. Catherine had been exiled for loving poorly, but she had found her way home by learning to love well. And in doing so, she had discovered that the heart's capacity for richness has nothing to do with status or money, and everything to do with courage, authenticity, and the willingness to show up for each other, day after day, through all the challenges and joys that life brings. The ranch still stands today, over a century later, run by the 6th generation of Becketts. The original house is preserved as a museum, and visitors can see the simple furniture, the carved rocking chair, the photograph of Catherine's parents, the books she used to teach her children. They can read letters between Catherine and Cole, filled with affection and practical concerns and the deep intimacy of two people who truly knew each other. They can see photographs from later years. Catherine and Cole surrounded by family, their faces lined with age but their eyes still bright with love. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, if you stand on the porch of that old house and watch the sun set over the Arizona desert, you can almost feel the presence of those two remarkable people who proved that love, real love, the kind that shows up and stays and builds and grows, is the richest treasure anyone could ever hope to possess. Catherine Hartwell had been sent to the wilderness to learn humility and wisdom, but what she had found was so much more: partnership, purpose, and a love rich enough to last forever.